It is Friday, November 6th. Let's talk PlayStation. Okay, everyone, so this is pretty much it. By the same time next week for our next episode of LTPS, PS5 will have officially launched here in the US, also Canada, Japan, New Zealand, Mexico, and our coverage here on this channel can really kick off, and that's super exciting, of course. This past week we saw more consoles showing up in warehouses, and also we had an embargo lift today, so we got a good amount of stuff to cover, and this will be our last run-up of PS5 news and details until the console actually is available to the public. So let's get into it first with our PlayStation Plus reminder. The November games are available right now. That's Hollow Knight Void Heart Edition and Middle-earth Shadow of War. And remember, November 12th, if you buy a PS5, you are also getting access to Bug Snacks. And it does appear as though you can claim Bug Snacks ahead of time without owning a PS5, so that's super good. Still up in the air about the PlayStation Plus collection, but keep that in mind. November 12th, Bug Snacks will also be available. Now, it's important to start with this for our first news story, PlayStation 5 availability on day one. So if you recall, I brought up in certain videos that normally with console launches on day one, there are some extra units that aren't allowed to be pre-ordered ahead of time, and so there is extra allocation to go to the store on day one and hopefully buy a console if you didn't get a pre-order. Well, we started seeing this trickle out in Europe, Japan, and now it is pretty much global. For day one availability outside of pre-orders, do not go to a local store and camp out, line up, things like that. They're trying to discourage that behavior. We are in the middle of a pandemic, of course, and so it is very important that you don't surround yourself amongst a lot of people unnecessarily. And so for day one, there are chances and opportunities to buy a PS5 if you didn't already secure a console, just that it will be all online only. And so I know that is very frustrating to many people, of course, but at the very least, there are chances to buy PS5 if you didn't get one already. Now, if you did secure a pre-order, it is important to call your local store ahead of time to find out what they're actually doing. So some places are opening up normal store hours. You go pick up the console whenever you want, come home. Some places are doing it by appointment only, and so Best Buy, for example, you can pick a time slot to go pick up the machine safely, and then you can come back home with it. My only concern is that not only are online orders probably going to be another frenzy, just that you're going to have all that stuff happen alongside people successfully going to stores still and buying PS5s without pre-orders, and then posting on Twitter, Reddit, wherever that they did it, and that upsets people that stayed home and tried their luck online again, fighting scalpers, and then everybody else that's trying to order. And so it's just a logistics thing. Like, how do you make sure globally that every single retailer complies unless you cease shipments of consoles to individual stores and they only stay in fulfillment centers? Like, it's just going to happen. There's going to be examples of people doing this, and that's not me advocating to still go to a store and try your luck. Don't do that. But I feel like that's probably what's going to play out. Going to be another thing that upsets a lot of people. And it is a frustrating experience if you still can't get a console and you try day one and that doesn't work out as well. But hopefully it works out for most people. Anyway, moving on to our next news story, we have our PlayStation Now update for November. Recent games that were added, that's F1 2020, Injustice 2, Rage 2, My Time at Porsche, Warhammer Vermintide 2, but also Kingdom Come Deliverance. And that last one there, Kingdom Come, that's the only one with an expiration date that'll leave the service May 3rd, 2021. But other than that, these games are available right now on PS Now. Anyway, moving on though, let's get into all these PS5 details that we learned from this recent embargo that lifted today. This one was a lot more useful than the last embargo, where all we got were console unboxings, discussions about the DualSense and Astro's Playroom, which is really the same stuff that we've been hearing for the better part of the last 6 months. So today we saw reviews for the console itself, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Astro's Playroom again, but also a lot of UI features that we didn't know about previously, also backwards compatibility testing, and some other little details mixed in between there. So we're going to cover all this stuff from what we learned today. Starting off with reviews, I guess, because the console itself is really hard to gauge. Obviously, you're going to want to check out reviews separately to see what people are thinking about the console itself. But for Spider-Man Miles Morales, sitting at around 80 on Metacritic, same with Astro's Playroom, which you can't really complain. Sounds great. Astro's a free experience to begin with, and what we keep hearing over and over and over again is that the DualSense is that game changer, and it's so encouraging to really hear that for, you know, what is a feature that on the surface appears like our typical next-gen gimmicks. We see this with usually every new console generation. There's always some sort of unique feature to the machine that oftentimes seems really cool in practice, and the first lineup of software on that platform usually makes great use of it, or novelty use of it, but then over time it starts to erode away, especially for third parties where they're trying to ship games on 6 or 7 different platforms, and so they can't go out of their way to really use a unique feature on one platform versus another, but at least right now, and many third parties are using the DualSense, which is really good to hear so far. It seems like that really is the most one of the most genuine experiences on PS5 so far, outside of the typical, you know, huge bump to frame rate, resolution, things like that, the ray tracing, all the visual enhancements that we often expect with next gen. Now, moving on to more finer details, we'll start with this. PT, it is not playable on PS5, or at least it's not right now. It was before. What we're hearing from Polygon and Games Radar, one of the first games that they tested for backwards compatibility was PT. And sure enough, much like we were expecting, because the compatibility rate is so high, the game transferred over and played no problem. But then a few days later, because of a firmware update or just restarting the console or whatever, the game was rendered unplayable on PS5, even if it was installed, or you can't transfer it over. And what we're hearing is that a Sony spokesperson has confirmed it was a publisher issue, which means Konami said, yeah, that's not happening, take it down. Come on, dude, really? Like, this is so annoying. You know, this game needs to be preserved. It's such a genuine horror experience. It's fantastic. And if there's some sort of issue with it, reshape it just a little bit and then maybe sell it again. You can sell it for $5 easily. And I'm trying to put ideas in their head because, come on. I mean, it would be really great if this was available again for people to check out and play for a little bit and mess with. I mean, it's all about that game preservation. The fact that this game is only living today now on PS4s digitally through external HDDs, getting data copied and transferred over, and existing through PSN IDs only that have previously owned it. Huge pain. This is a little rant of mine, sorry, but I was really holding out for PT working. I am curious as to if you don't update your system day one, can you transfer it over? Because the consoles that are getting manufactured and sitting in boxes right now probably have an earlier firmware update. And so if you want full compatibility, you have to download the latest firmware. But maybe don't update right away, try to transfer it over, and you might actually have some playability there. That's just a theory, but obviously if you then update the firmware, they could filter that game out retroactively. And so even though it's living on the console, that might be an issue. I don't know, I'm saying this too early, but that's a thing. Anyway, let's move on to some new PS5 UI features that we just learned about. In fact, we had a little sneak peek at these a few days ago from the PlayStation Support YouTube channel, but the full list of features here, these should be most of the features that we just found out today. I'm probably missing a few of these, but bear with me. Playtime is tracked for PS5 and PS4 games, so that's something that a lot of people really wanted. It's here, your playtime is tracked, and for PS4 games, this is retroactive, so what you've accumulated right now will show on PS5, so that's super cool. You can check out all your games and how much time you've put into the PS4 lifecycle. We always knew that Sony was counting these, but they never released these numbers unless it was on their terms. No quick resume for PS5, so that's also kind of a disappointment for many people. No quick resume. There is a section of the UI where it looks like it's a quick resume feature, but basically it's more of a recent games tab. Every time you start a new game, when you have one that's currently running, you are doing a fresh boot. So for PS5 games, obviously the booting is very quick. You're looking at anywhere from 7 to 8 seconds, possibly up to 10 seconds. We already saw Destruction AllStars boot, but we've also got a lot of tests showing us how quickly Spider-Man and Astro starts up. So we know that games will start quick, but as of right now, there's no quick resume. As far as I know, this feature is definitely coming, so it could be a firmware update, but right now, not available. On a player's profile, you'll now see something called accolades, and what these are, they're rewards you can give or receive based on experiences you may have had with another player online. In settings, there's now something called spoiler warnings, and so this is something you can adjust based off of when you visit another person's profile. Let's say you look at their captured content or their broadcast content, and you could receive warnings based off of the thumbnail images or the stuff that you're actually viewing. That's super cool. I like that Sony's doing this on a system-wide level for trying to help people avoid spoilers. The game preset options. So this is something we saw a few days ago. Basically, these are system-wide toggles you can do for common settings that you might find in games, like a performance mode, difficulty settings, the X and Y axis for first person or third person, subtitles, audio. That's really cool. Unfortunately, it needs to be supported by developers, and there's no clear indication if it's mandated by Sony for PS5 games moving forward. And so you could toggle these on, but there's no guarantee that by the time you start a game, those settings are automatically applied for you, but that's the idea there. The Media Gallery app will let you crop images and add text overlays, and you can even change the font size, colors, things like that. The Create button in general, there's a lot here versus what's on PS4, so it's hard to pinpoint what's what's brand new here, but it seems like in general there's a lot more control over how you capture your gameplay, whether it's controlling the time duration, looking at all the reverse gameplay that's being recorded. The UI in general for how gameplay capture looks, I think, is a lot more user-friendly this time around. But remember, PS5 can also capture in 4K, just that if you move that file outside of PS5, you're working with a WebM format, so that's kind of hard to work with. But otherwise, it seems like there's a lot more you can do with the Create button. That's great. There's accessibility options that can be accessed right from the Control Center, so this is awesome. We talked about this, I think, last week when it came to accessibility on PS5 and Sony's commitment to offering accessibility options on a system-wide level. These are right in the Control Center, and so there's actually a lot from the Control Center that you can quickly toggle right away, and that makes it super handy to access these things without having to leave the game or feel like you're leaving the game and going into a separate menu that takes you completely away from that screen that you were just looking at. Now, there's probably a few things that I'm missing in there, but for the most part, those are all the stand-up features that we just learned about today for PS5. But now let's move on to backwards compatibility. This is something we've been waiting for a very long time. We finally have some testing done, and we have a good idea of what the performance looks like, and sure enough, looks pretty good. This was predictable, of course, because Microsoft was more forthcoming in this area, and so they let, Series X prototypes go out fairly early, and a lot of people were able to test backwards compatibility over there. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages between both platforms and how they handle backwards compatibility, but for the most part, on PS5, same deal here. If a game is capped at 30 FPS, sure enough, it hits 30 FPS. If a game has an unlocked frame rate, PS5 across the board for a lot of games seems to be hitting 60 no problem, and it's a locked 60. So generally speaking, it looks like PS4 games on PS5 is a great experience where you get that boosted performance. Well, that's generally speaking. What's the caveat? We did have a story a few days ago about Ubisoft posting an article about backwards compatibility on PS5, and there were a number of games on there, like Assassin's Creed, for example, that they said wouldn't work. And we already know that there's about 10 games from Sony where they confirmed those wouldn't work, and those were 10 games that I think most people could easily live without. And so this was strange. Ubisoft took down the article, said that there were some inaccuracies in the post, and well, today we have more clarity on why that probably happened or what miscommunication actually took place there. So with PS4 games on PS5, there's about 100 titles that will play and boot no problem. However, these 100 games will possibly show some behavioral patterns that aren't exactly normal, right? And so you could have weird glitches or flickering or just certain aspects of the game might not completely function properly on PS5 versus if they were played on PS4. And what's even more noteworthy about this is that, from what we're seeing, at least right now, it's not exactly obvious if there's problems for some of these games. So John Lindemann over at Digital Foundry said he didn't see anything, whereas I think Push Square and a few others noted for the Assassin's Creed games, so that's why they were probably on that Ubisoft list. They ran into some weird flickering issues with the shadows in the game. There was also something about textures being off on a certain title. Can't remember at this point, but that's what these 100 games are. And so 100 games is quite sizable, but still a drop in the bucket compared to the full 4,000. And it seems like even in those 100 games, there's not noticeable issues, or at least within the first few hours that was tested, right? That's the problem with something like this, is that we need millions of people at this point to start testing and evaluating these games, and we'll certainly have that once the console launches. But that's the weird situation that happened right now. And we had an idea that this was going to play out because on the PlayStation Store, certain games are marked ahead of time before all this testing even took place, where it says on the store if you play this on PS5, it could have some weird issues. But let's talk load times, and this is also unsurprising. Much like Series X playing Xbox One games, when you play a PS4 title on PS5, load times are decreased substantially. It varies widely depending on the game, of course, and remember, these are PS4 titles that are not patched for PS5 native compatibility. They're not seeing that super fast SSD I/O throughput, and so there are bottlenecks there. It's still going to take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute to get into certain games, but it will be much faster versus what you're used to on PS4, and that's great to see. The only noteworthy comparison that we can really draw is that Series X seems to be getting into Xbox One games a little bit faster versus the same third-party game on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. That's probably a CPU bottleneck, I would imagine. CPU is a little bit beefier on Series X, and so that might explain why it's got a few-second lead on most games, but it's not a huge difference, and so that's not really anything to worry about. What's also cool is that when you're playing PS4 games on, say, an external HDD, it'll still be faster than PS4. If it's an external SSD, it's actually about as fast versus the internal SSD. So I know there's a lot of worry and concerns about SSD expansion. Remember, we do have a story later about that. And, well, right now you do have options if you don't want to upgrade your PS5's internal storage. At this point, my recommendation would be definitely go for some sort of external storage and just get that ready to go, because it's pretty much plug and play from PS4 to PS5. But that's pretty much everything that we learned so far from this embargo left. There's still a lot of launch games that have not been reviewed, and that's going to be highly dependent on the publishers, but at least for Sony's side, that's it. They did not get Demon's Souls, so that's something that will probably come later, but I mean, we're just a few days away from the console launching at this point. You might not need reviews. You can get that day one if you're really into it. They were not allowed to use the PlayStation Store, PlayStation Now, so these are services that'll probably go live up until the very end or close to it. We'll find out, but again, there's only a few days left. Moving on to our next news story, Sackboy Big Adventure. It looks like online play has been delayed for this game. Now, the title itself is fine. It's going to come day one for PS5, just that you will not be able to play online. You can still do couch co-op offline, but online play, they need a few more weeks to work out the kinks on that, and so they'll actually release a patch by the end of 2020 that'll include that functionality, also cross-gen support for PS4 to PS5, and then save file transfers from PS4 to PS5. That'll all come within a few weeks after the game actually comes out. Unfortunate, but not a huge hang-up. You just have to wait a little bit longer, although I imagine that this might stop some people from buying it right on day one for PS5. Moving on, much like Sony promised, we did get a second trailer for Destruction All-Stars this week, alongside a brand new PlayStation blog post that told us about the game modes that'll be available with win conditions, so that's always great to have some context on more of a unique take on the car combat genre, if you'd call it. But the trailer itself was, I think, disappointing. I mean, it's too heavy on jump cuts like the first one, so you can't really see what's going on. I would have preferred a full uninterrupted match, but either way, the modes that'll be available, Mayhem, this is like your standard team deathmatch or deathmatch. Then you've got Carnado, this is basically where you're earning gears by smashing other players, and then those gears are banked until you sacrifice your vehicle by driving into the Carnado, and that's going to force you back on foot to try and grab another vehicle or potentially steal one. Then there's Stockpile. This is like capture and control, so you're wrecking opponents that drop gears. You then collect those on foot, which will then force you to run a gauntlet to try and bank your collection at the end for your team. Then there's Gridfall. This is where the bottom of the stage slowly disappears over time. Last person wins. There's multiple respawns there, so if you run out of respawns, you'll lose. Then there's challenge modes and a challenge series against the AI, and they also reiterate you're going to see more all-stars and challenge modes over time, things like that. And so far, honestly, I'm liking what I'm hearing. I just want a full match played out in front of me, but I like the mix of on foot and the car combat. I think this has a good potential of actually working, and now people can watch this and not being under the guise that it takes $70 to buy it on day one, right? I think we're totally okay with waiting a little bit to get this free with a PlayStation Plus membership. And so, while I don't think it's a guarantee that this is going to be another Fall Guys or Rocket League, I think this has a very good shot of being a game that has a lot of that has a healthy player base over time that people genuinely enjoy. Next up, for Demon's Souls, we just got some new details for this game, like how many official game guides will be available. Remember, this is a feature of the PS5's UI for PS Plus members, where when you're playing a game, you can suspend it, and in the control center, you can see all those activity cards, and some of those cards will have objectives in them, and those objectives could have text hints or video guides. And so for Demon's Souls, we know that it's going to have over 180 video guides available, which is a ton, and we also were wondering, well, where are these coming from, right? Well, for this, it's from Bluepoint, specifically. It's official game guides right from them, and we were also thinking, you know, are they going to source it from YouTube also as well? You know, you could pull data from YouTube and try to find a relevant video and just do a start and stop point for whatever section of the game that, you know, that hint is trying to help you with. But this is what's so problematic, I think, about this feature, is that it sounds great, and the way Sony described it for the context of where you might use it would make the most sense of maybe just collectibles or trying to avoid spoilers for a story-heavy game. And let's face it, if you're looking up hints for a story-heavy game on YouTube, I mean, you're playing a dangerous game because people are ridiculous and they put spoilers right in the thumbnail, which I wish that was a strikeable offense. I can't believe people do that, but I guess that's just part of the problem, especially because I'm inclined to say that most people are probably still going to look up game guides online for what will easily be more thorough answers versus what they can find in the UI. But again, it depends, right? Collectibles make a lot of sense, fast, easy, accessible. Just that now that we know developers have to do this, this already tells us this is going to be very limited and restrictive in terms of what they can show, but also how many games will even use this. I mean, where does this fit in the development pipeline? Who do you assign this work to? Do you give it to QA, or Is there incentive that Sony's offering to developers to do this extra work to offer game guides? How many third parties are going to really use this? I mean, we've got plenty of examples of third parties using 3D audio, adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, but for this, I mean, it's a toss-up. I'm wondering what's the longevity of this feature and how useful is it really going to be? Now, staying on the topic of Demon's Souls, we did also see some new screenshots for the character creator. Looks really good, very thorough. A lot of toggles and switches. I'm sure we'll see a lot of cool things out of there. We also learned a lot about the photo mode, and it is very configurable, much like Ghost of Tsushima or The Last of Us Part 2. There's a lot you can change and mess around with, so for Demon's Souls, you can pan around and zoom, you can change the character's pose, you can remove swords, their shield, you can change the expression on their face. There's all these filter effects you can use, which, by the way, all the filter effects, much like the original PS3 one you can use those during gameplay, which is awesome. I always love these photo modes, especially when they are this thorough, because Twitter becomes this amazing place where people take these incredible shots, and the more configuration there is, the more funny shots that you often see too, and I love seeing those. For our next news story, Gran Turismo 7, when is this game coming out? We've often theorized here that maybe it's sooner rather than later. Well, maybe that might actually be the case if a recent YouTube ad is to be believed. One person noticed that there was a YouTube ad. It was that small little thumbnail, and in the bottom left corner you can see that it actually says in French, scheduled for the first half of 2021, which is, well, that's very soon. Now, I'd imagine that this ad's gone, or there's no other examples of it popping up again, but apparently when clicked, it took you to the official PS5 product page for the game, I believe, and that's really all we have to go on. Now, if this is true, I mean, 2021 is looking packed. There's a lot of games in there, especially from Sony first party, but just to rattle off a few, I mean, we're expecting Ratchet & Clank, God of War, which is probably the later half of the year for sure, Horizon Forbidden West, who knows where that's going to fall, also Destruction AllStars, that's earlier in the year, and then there's the timed exclusives like Ken of Bridge of Spirits and Deathloop. Those were supposed to be closer to launch, those got delayed, also Ghostwire Tokyo, and then we're still talking about Final Fantasy 16, where's that going to fall, which I still think is 2022 at the earliest, but if we have all this for 2021, then it's going to be very easy to get to 2022, right? I mean, this is looking like a very strong first-year software lineup, which we don't often see for brand new hardware. Moving on to our next news story, for PlayStation VR, unfortunately, it looks like right now it won't be playing PS5 games. The current headset, at least, what we know right now, it can only play PS4 games through backwards compatibility. This revelation came out from the fact that we now know No Man's Sky is getting a PS5 upgrade that has VR support. We know about Hitman 3, that's PS4 and PS5, and that has a VR mode, but Sony sent a statement to Upload VR pretty much stating that for these games, you need to play the PS4 version through backwards compatibility on PS5 to play the VR mode. There's no PS5 games for the current headset today, and they basically said we have not announced any PS5 games for PSVR. So as of right now, based off of that statement alone, it's not an outright denial unless Upload VR decided to not publish the full answer, which I don't know why they wouldn't do that. But this wasn't looking very optimistic anyway based off of these two cross-gen titles, the camera adapter, not being able to use the new HD camera. It would have been nice, though, to have some sort of native PS5 support or the possibility for patches for current PS4, PSVR games, right? I mean, obviously the headset has its own set of limitations, but going into PS5, outside of Game Boost, where we could see decreased load times, which PSVR has some pretty rough load times, it would have been nice to have that potential for VR developers. Moving on to more unfortunate news, it looks like PS5 will not support a 1440p output. This initially came into question about 2 weeks ago when we saw the monitor manufacturer BenQ post an article claiming that it would be supported, and then they quickly removed it. And because that happened, I don't even think I brought it up on LTPS because I had suspicions that it probably isn't supported, and well, here we are today where Sony released a statement to IGN Italy confirming that no, PS5 will not do 1440p. Now this definitely sucks. Options are always better, and for people that play on a PC gaming monitor, it looks crisp, it looks nice. Not a lot of people use these monitors, but it's still an option, right? And so if you do prefer to play on something like this, I know for PS4 Pro, I think it defaults down to 1080p, which is not really ideal at all. So it's disappointing, and considering that it doesn't do it today at launch, I mean, it's probably not ever going to do it, I would imagine. So, I mean, if you're going to be playing on a monitor like that, just be well aware of your limitations there. You might want to get a TV For our next news story, The Verge was able to confirm that for PS5, day one, it will not support SSD expansion, so that little M2 bay will be disabled. You can't use it, and then down the road through a firmware update, that's when they will enable it, and also probably Sony will tell you what drives work and are compatible on PS5, because that is the growing concern here, is that there's not many PCI 4.0 NVMe drives that are fast enough to work on PS5. As of right now, there's maybe 3 or 4 of them that in theory should work, but that's the problem, is that in theory they might work, but we don't really know just yet. And so for Sony, if you recall during the Road to PS5 video, Mark Cerny did mention that ideally they'd like to have this ready by launch, but probably a little bit past launch. That's when they'd start evaluating M2 drives and figuring out which ones work and don't work. And there's also the matter of the size of the drives as well. There's no standardized form factor for these things, and so the size and also the possibility of heat sinks might mean that they physically don't fit in there, and these things are expensive. You're looking at well over $200 for 1 terabyte, and so right now it's disabled. You can't use it, can't buy anything. That's probably the best measure to do right now, and I know people are frustrated given that the usable space on PS5 is around 630 some odd gigabytes, but time is really on your side here, and so while it may be a hassle to move content around or deleting it or whatever, the longer you wait before you expand your storage, more manufacturers will finally start offering these things. Prices will start to come down. Probably by the time this is enabled, you're still looking at $200 for 1 terabyte, but either way, you don't have to really rush into it. And this is really fine. I don't think this is a huge issue. Moving on, it's been a while since we talked about this, but we do have an update on the Silent Hill PS5 rumor, and it looks like we've got 3 separate sources all saying they've heard the same thing. So the rumor is that we'll have a formal reveal of this project during the Game Awards. That's December 10th, and this initially started from Roberto Serrano over on Twitter, where he tweeted out, "Rumor 12/10, the Game Awards world premiere, Konami, PS5, Silent Hill." Then we had a report from Rely on Horror where they said they heard the same thing, not from Roberto Serrano, just that they heard it earlier and decided not to run with the story, but once he sent this tweet out, then they published it. And then over on Recent Era, we have the Insider Catharsis T. I'm not Rely on Horror source, but I heard the same thing, so we're at least 3 sources who've heard the same thing. And that's pretty much everything so far. Now, we've had this rumor come up on numerous occasions. The fact that we've got it from multiple sources, and even prior we had it from multiple sources, it's always been described as a badly kept secret in Japan. It seems like it probably is happening, more a matter of when. And the Game Awards would probably be soon. I mean, keep in mind, these rumors are suggesting that this project didn't actually kick off until 2018, but probably closer to 2019. And if that's the case, they might not have a whole lot to show. And if they do, it is probably just a teaser at the most, which is not really what we want nowadays. We want something that's closer to when the game's actually going to come out. But it's also worth noting that 2021 is the 20th anniversary for Silent Hill 2, so that might be an appropriate tie-in if they want to go for something like that. Who knows? December 10th is relatively close, though, so we'll find out what actually happens soon. Now, we also have an update for the company that was going to be making custom PS5 plates. Looks like that's not going to happen. So, initially they were called PlayStation 5, then they changed their name to be more compliant and their site imagery, and now it looks like the legal action from Sony did not stop. They have ceased operations. People are still thinking that they were a scam, but they've refunded all their orders, and I've talked to the owner before they got into all this trouble, and they seemed very legitimate. They wanted to start a company and do all these cool plates and things like that, and why scam people when you can make a profitable company? So it seems like they were on board to do this. I still don't know if they had a PS5 case mold to reference from or whatever. I don't know about that, but the question was, how good were those plates really going to be? But it looks like Sony stopped that, which is disappointing, because that's what was so great about the teardown, was seeing those plates come off and going, oh my god, it's so easy, no screws, no nothing. That told us right away there's probably going to be an open market for these things getting customized and resold, and it's going to be hard to stop China from manufacturing a lot of these things, I'd imagine, but is this a situation where Sony has some sort of intellectual property or some sort of patent on the clipping mechanism for this plate to where they want to protect it? Are they just being overly protective of consumers' hardware so that it doesn't damage the system, and then they have to come up with some way to avoid people's warranties beyond that little sticker peel? Do they want to have a monopoly on selling plates from them? I don't really know. But it just seems disappointing that the first company that sprang up had to get swatted away very quickly. Anyway, with all that said, though, it's time to get to Let's Talk Plus, our weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. We do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are all the news stories that I want to talk about, you all. We did 3 uploads this past week. DualSense coverage, we played around with that. First look at the Pulse 3D headset, and then also everything we know about PS5 on Wednesday, which I don't expect everybody to watch every Friday episode. So check out that video. In 14-something minutes, you are completely caught up on everything we know about PS5. And now it's just a matter of actually getting to launch. PlayStation 5 comes out Thursday, and this is where we're in a weird spot with this show because I usually film it and edit Thursday to get it ready for Friday, and obviously PS5 is going to take priority there. So we're going to kick off our coverage on the 12th and well into the 13th. I mean, I think it goes without saying that LTPS is going to have to get moved somewhere. I don't know if that's Saturday, Sunday, maybe early. I'll see how the week plays out, of course, depending on if there's a lot of news or urgent things that need to be talked about. You can follow on Twitter at Mystic Ryan if I have any sort of plan changes there, but otherwise, on the 12th, our PS5 coverage will officially kick off on the channel. So that's where we're at right now. And that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. So I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all whenever I see you.